Pop quiz for you. Who is the leader of the Republican Party? This is not a deep analysis question. I literally mean who is paid to have that job? Who has the actual job of being the leader of the Republican Party? It's not Michael Steele anymore, right? So who is in charge of the party now? If you guessed Reince Priebus, then you probably watch this show regularly. So thank you. Extra credit on tonight's pop quiz. What was Reince Priebus's job before he became head of the Republican Party? Hint, he was the head of a state Republican Party. His name is Reince Priebus. What state was he head of the party in before he became RNC chairman? Wisconsin. Ah, that's where he came from, new head of the Republican National Committee. On the night Mr. Priebus won the 7-round-long election to become RNC chairman, you might remember that we spoke with Doug Heye, the outgoing communications director for the Republican Party. Today we were looking back at that transcript and noticed a remarkable moment of sort of anti-foreshadowing in that interview. This was the night of January 14th, the night Reince Priebus took over the RNC. All of America was just trying to learn how to pronounce his name and wondering what Michael Steele was going to do next. And here's how Doug Heye explained to us who was this new head of the RNC.
He did a great job in Wisconsin. We had great wins there in that state. Scott Walker won his race, which we're all proud about.
That was, again, January 14th. And I say that was anti-foreshadowing because when Doug Heye said that, I would venture that nobody who wasn't either paying really deep attention to Wisconsin politics in the past year or a Republican Party activist had any idea who this Scott Walker guy was that Doug was name dropping. Now, of course, everybody knows who Scott Walker is. Now, Scott Walker's at the heart of the biggest story in American politics this winter, the biggest story in American liberal politics in a very long time. But back in January, the RNC picked Reince Priebus, Wisconsin Republican Party chairman, to be leader of the party. And as of that night, the party was already hyping this guy nobody had heard of, Scott Walker, as the new political face to represent the new Republican Party. The country at large has only been paying attention to Governor Walker for about 10 days. I think that includes Republicans and Democrats across the country. He's somebody people are just learning about now. He's not somebody who has been famous. But in terms of Republican Party institutions, the actual Republican Party and its structure, they are all over Scott Walker as a phenomenon. When you go to the Republican National Committee website right now, they are so not together that they are still on the right side, on one side of their screen, selling Fire Pelosi mugs and gifts. What? You want to fire her as minority leader too? Yeah, but the thing that doesn't change at the front page of the RNC website at GOP.com is, you see right there, help stop Obama and his union bosses. That's their permanent front page icon right now. You click on it, it takes you to a page titled Wisconsin Fight, a fight we must win. They're nationalizing the Scott Walker fight to bust unions, and they're trying to turn it into donations for the Republican Party. The Republican Governors Association, as well, immediately jumped in to support Scott Walker with a petition that they set up at standwithscott.com that has since launched a host of Republican imitators, standingwithscott.com, also standwithwalker.com, all very original. But the Republican Governors Association was first. The Republican establishment has decided that Governor Walker is their guy for the country. You've got the Wisconsin Party chairman running the party now. You've got the new Wisconsin governor, who nobody had ever heard of before 5 minutes ago, picking this fight that the Republican Party is doing everything it can to nationalize. They want to make this fight, and they want to make Scott Walker the face of the party. The Wisconsin Fight page at the RNC website says Scott Walker's anti-union fight there is a battle for America's future, a battle that just happens to require you to give money to the RNC. In terms of the Republican Party, figuring out who the leader of its party is, the leader of that party is post-Bush, post-McCain, the great Republican Party identity crisis of the 2000s, who they want you to think of when you think Republican now, they have picked this guy. And he knows it. When he was speaking with somebody on the phone who he thought was a conservative billionaire named David Koch, but who actually was a gonzo journalist from Western New York named Ian, Governor Walker made clear that even though most of America is just now figuring out who he is, he sees himself as the vanguard of the new Republican Party.
I talk to Kasich every day, John's got to stand firm in Ohio. I think we can do the same thing with Rick Scott in Florida. I think Snyder, if he got a little more support, probably could do that in Michigan. I mean, you start going down the list, a lot of us, there's a lot of us new governors who got elected to do something big.
You're the first domino.
Yep. This is our moment.
I am the first domino. If that isn't a clear enough sign about his, if not delusions of grandeur, at least his allusions to grandeur. Governor Walker also with fake David Koch on the phone and at press conferences and in a recent interview with the Heritage Foundation, and every other time anybody gets anywhere near him with a microphone, Governor Walker cannot stop comparing himself to Ronald Reagan. Republicans really want this guy to be the new Ronald Reagan. He sees himself as the new Ronald Reagan. He talks about himself constantly as the new Ronald Reagan. That overlooked little institution known as the Republican Party is building their national strategy, their national reconstruction around what's going on in Wisconsin, around Wisconsin Republicans, under the leadership of Reince Priebus, the guy who used to run the party in that state, and around the idea of Scott Walker. This fight to strip union rights is how they are trying to rebuild the National Republican Party. And this fight to strip union rights in Wisconsin that they are building everything on, this fight is not going very well. And that would just be a state-level story about Wisconsin if this was a state-level story about Wisconsin. But it is the Republicans who have decided that this is a national fight and therefore a national story. So their failure here has national implications. This is day 10 of this story dominating national headlines. The newest poll today out of Wisconsin shows a majority, 56% of likely Wisconsin voters are against what Walker's doing. They're against stripping collective bargaining rights. They are against this fight the Republicans have picked. Walker just won the governorship there 3 months ago, and the state is already against his big signature idea. Nationally, it's even worse. 61% overall oppose what Scott Walker is doing. That kind of plan. It's not working. In terms of Walker calling on all those Republican governors who he says are going to join him, Republican governors he thinks are going to follow in his big Reagan-esque footsteps or whatever, those governors are not following his lead. They, in fact, are bailing. Indiana Governor Mitch Daniels, who Walker name-checked to the fake billionaire on the phone, Mitch Daniels called Republicans in his state to yank their union-stripping legislation that they had put forward. Quoting from today's Washington Post, Walker is now calling for other governors to join him in fighting unions, but there aren't many takers so far. In addition to Daniels, New Jersey Governor Chris Christie and Iowa Governor Terry Branstad have now become the latest governors to balk at going after the unions. They joined Mitch Daniels, Michigan Governor Rick Snyder, Florida Governor Rick Scott, and Pennsylvania Governor Tom Corbett in shying from that battle. Walker sees himself as a leader. The National Republican Party clearly is trying to make him into a national Republican leader here. But are you still leading if there's nobody behind you? Not only is this fight not catching on nationwide, but the strategy in the state of Wisconsin is failing. When the governor got punked with that prank phone call, he gave away the strategy he was going to use to try to trick Senate Democrats into coming back into the state so they could get a quorum to pass his union stripping bill. He gave away the trick. He told it to a guy he thought was a big donor. And now the Democrats know what that strategy is, so they will not be tricked. The Senate Republicans in Wisconsin also had a plan to all but force the Democrats to come back to the state. They were going to bring up a voter ID bill, a bill that would make it harder to register to vote. It would hurt Democratic chances not only in the next election, but in every election to come. That was their big threat to get Senate Democrats to come back. They were going to pass this voter ID bill, right? They blew it. In order to pass without any of the Democrats there, they had to make it so the bill had no fiscal impact. In order to make it so the bill had no fiscal impact, they had to change the bill to make it so blatantly unconstitutional that even they had to admit it was unconstitutional, and they yanked it before they even got to vote on it. They're blowing it. We also heard Governor Walker bragging to David Koch about how the protests were dwindling, right? The protests were getting smaller. He was saying this in an encouraging way to this man he thought was his billionaire conservative donor. But if you believe the protesters today, the protesters say today was their biggest day of protesting yet in Wisconsin, with not only thousands of people still in Madison for yet another day, but people also protesting against Governor Walker and his union stripping plan in 18 other cities in Wisconsin. There aren't all that many cities in Wisconsin. I'm using the word cities loosely. In terms of opposition, it is getting smaller it is not only not getting smaller, it is getting bigger. The Wall Street Journal has a great piece today about how all of these different unions that sort of hate each other. That's how it is in liberal politics. All these unions that sort of hate each other, public sector unions, private sector unions, rival unions that have been competing over trying to organize the same groups of workers. These unions who usually do not get along, in this case, have decided to put aside all of their differences. They have all become unified around this fight, and they are all willing to spend millions of dollars collectively to capitalize on this Republican overreach in Wisconsin on an issue where the public is actually with the unions. Anecdotally, as a liberal person who happens to know a few liberals, there is nothing that liberals want to talk about right now more than this situation with Scott Walker in Wisconsin. This thing in Wisconsin has energized the left, energized the Democratic Party specifically toward addressing and taking care of its traditional and neglected base in a way that nothing any Democrat has done in recent memory has been able to pull off. Scott Walker is the man the Republican Party proper wanted to lead them. Turns out he is the man who is uniting the left in America. This is the fight by which they thought he would lead Republican politics in the 2000s. And you know what? The two big headlines today were huge protests and Madison police chief troubled by Walker's comments on protesters. This is what this is how it is ending. The governor's comments coming in a prank phone call and not objecting when the prank phone caller suggested seating troublemakers in the crowd to try to make things seem worse than they were in Wisconsin. Today, the headlines after 10 days of protests in Wisconsin are that the protests are bigger than ever and that the Madison police chief would please like a word with the state's irresponsible governor. How's the politics of this working out for you guys?